Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Monday, November the 14th, 2022. Voters in three states approved ballot measures that will change their state constitutions to prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for crime, while those in a fourth state rejected the move. The measures curtail the use of prison labor in Alabama, Tennessee, and Vermont. In Oregon, Yes was leading its anti slavery ballot initiative, but the vote had remained too early as of Friday. But then told over the weekend it did uh, stay. Yes, in fact, it went the other way. So, they are just not playing with this slavery stuff. Um, we're going to talk about this with Dr. David Childs, professor at the University of Northern Kentucky. Good morning, Dr. Childs.
Good morning. Glad to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you back, Dr. Childs. Let me go state by state here. Vermont, for instance, the ballot question was whether the state should prohibit slavery in the state constitution. 140,138 votes were cast, with 125,255 or 89.4% saying yes, get rid of it, but 14,883 or 10.6% said we need to keep it.
Yes, these are old laws that really go back to the end of enslavement, the end of the Civil War, the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment, there's a section one says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And that's the kicker. The 13th Amendment purported to abolish slavery at the end of the Civil War, but there's that clause that a lot of states picked up in the South,
Yep.
except that it's as a punishment for crime. And so these states have kept that legislation in their state constitution since 1865.
Well, Tennessee had Amendment 3, which asks whether to remove the constitutional language allowing slavery as punishment. And folks voted yes. 1.2 million folks voted yes to remove it, but 316,900 said no. Oregon was really shameful, though, in its measure. It was measure
Yeah.
112. It asked whether the state should remove constitutional language allowing slavery as punishment. And 54% said
Mm,
yes, and 46% said no. So
mm.
547,107 Oregon residents voted to keep slavery as a form of punishment. That's pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is. It just shows you the work that we have to do. I do work around critical race theory. And I want to say this for a second as it relates to your comment and the people that support an amendment, or the people that support laws to make slavery legal. I do a lot of work in universities, but also I do a lot of work in high schools and middle schools. And in Kentucky, I live in Ohio, but I teach in Kentucky. In Kentucky, they have passed so-called critical race theory laws against so-called critical race theory, and the laws basically say, in a nutshell, that we can't teach any Black history, we can't teach any material in the social studies classroom or language arts in the classroom in general that will make people feel bad about being white, or any. This is the language. Any
Mm-hmm.
curriculum that would um, be divisive or divisive. And what they're trying to get at is they're trying to erase our history. They're trying to get to devalue, which has always happened, the idea of teaching African American history, learning the history of enslavement. They want to keep it, but at the same time, they don't want you to talk about it and expose it for its evil. And so, all I'm saying is everything we're talking about is rooted in history. That's the importance of learning our history. That's why I became a historian. I was recently, I'm saying this for a reason, I was recently elected to be on the board of the Kentucky History Association, and it's an old organization that goes back before slavery in 1828. And so I'm the only black man. There's another system. I'm the only black man on this historic Kentucky Historical Society, and and in the
Mm,
that makes get this, Stacey. It's illegal for us in Kentucky. I want the listeners to hear this, to teach African American history in the public schools. Now we can, if I want to have the kindergartners color a picture of Dr. King, we can do that. If we want to, if we want to sing Kumbaya and say something about maybe Harriet Tubman and color a picture and do a word fine. But if you begin to talk about what we're talking about today, the legacy of slavery in this country, how the state constitutions are still debating whether it's going to be illegal, teachers can get fired for teaching that.
mm.
This thing has layers. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, there's a couple of other states. Look, Alabama, 76.6% voted yes to ratify the recompiled state constitution. And in Louisiana, Amendment 7 says remove constitutional language allowing slavery as punishment. They overwhelmingly voted not to remove
Broke it
that
down.
language.
I mean, come on, it's Louisiana. I mean, if I had to pick one, I would have said either Kentucky, which is my state, or Louisiana. That
But
is, yeah,
you know, and it's probably going in a whole nother way, but
yeah.
I just leave it like this so we can stay on track. Dave Chappelle's Saturday Night Live monologue left a lot to, well, let me put it this way. You should watch it. You should really watch it. If you haven't
I
seen
heard
that
about it. I haven't watched it. I heard
opening
about this on my
monologue,
list.
you got to watch it. But these initiatives, Dr. Childs, they're not going to force immediate changes in state prisons, but they may invite legal challenges over the practice of coercing prisoners to work under threat of sanctions or loss of privileges if they refuse to work. But, while anti-slavery advocates did celebrate some of these results, as we've seen, you still got states that say, hey, we invite slavery as a form of punishment.
Yes, and it's rooted. Earlier, I said this thing has layers. It's rooted in the for-profit prison industry. Way back when, people figured out that they could use people that are enslaved based on the law. They could lawfully use enslaved people in a process called convict leasing to make a profit. Imagine, Stacey, if you and I were going to have a company of making Black Lives Matter t-shirts or something, and we didn't have to pay anybody. Imagine how much money we could have. We could have thousands and thousands of employees, and we didn't have to pay anybody to produce them. We got the production free. We got the distribution free. You and I could be millionaires overnight. That's what's going on with the private prison industry. They're using black men, primarily black men. If you look at the statistics, especially in the South and places like Louisiana, if you look at statistics, black men and women are in many cases they weren't paid at all under convict leasing laws. And I want to really go into that history as time permits, a little bit about convict leasing. But I want to.
Yeah. Well, I just a couple quick things too, and one is along those lines. But the first one comes from Dr. Nicole McDaniel, and she says, what you said about making black people or white people feel bad?" She says, "Would that not be the same as saying we can't teach about the Holocaust because it would make Germans feel bad?"
It's the same thing. Exactly. The Holocaust. Well, the Holocaust is under the chopping block too. So the legislation. Thank you, Dr. McDaniel. The legislation really covers it. It's going after African American history, really is, but it's so broad that it would be. You could get in trouble potentially for teaching about the Holocaust. If you could, in my neck of the woods, you do have a large German population. And so you have ancestors of the Nazis.
Yeah. And you mentioned, okay, so going back to your point about the prison, here's one example that always stands out. I know there's other examples out there, But this really stands out to me because Jay-Z and Irv Gotti and guys like that have been really fighting to shut down Parchment Prison in Mississippi.
Hmm.
And Parchment Prison was actually literally built um, on a slave ground and was meant for
Yeah,
slaves. And the
yeah,
way they run Parchment Prison today is the way pretty much we
hmm,
have been shown how slavery was, whether it's through 12 years a slave, whether it's through
right,
roots or whatever your generation is. That's how they run that place.
right.
And it was actually built for slaves on a slave plantation.
That's so interesting. And it wasn't Parchment Farm was. It's also known as Parchment Farm. It was not an anomaly. It was very intentional. After enslavement, during the Southern during Reconstruction, the Southern strategy was to even though it was illegal in its old form, they try to find other ways to run their industries using black people. And convict leasing was really what I was getting at earlier. Convict leasing was a forced system of forced penal labor, which was historically practiced in this country and overwhelmingly involved African American men.
Hmm.
Recently, a form of the practice which draws voluntarily labor from the general prison population has been instituted in Western U.S. also. In the earlier forms of the practice, convict leasing provided prisoner labor to private parties such as plantation owners and corporations. And as I said, during Reconstruction, it really became more and more prevalent um, and used. Sometimes they didn't even, as I said, they didn't even pay the workers. Or very little. Convict leasing in the United States was widespread in the South during the Reconstruction period, which I was going to say 1865 to 1877. After the end of the Civil War, when many Southern legislators, this is the kicker, were ruled by majority coalitions of blacks and radical Republicans and Union generals, farmers and businessmen needed to find replacements for the forced labor once their slaves had been free. Some Southern legislatures passed black codes to restrict free movement of blacks. So it has a lot of history. For instance, several states made it illegal for a black man to change jobs without the approval of his employer. If
Mm.
convicted of vagrancy, blacks could be imprisoned. They also received sentences from a variety of petty offenses. States began to lease convict labor, states that is, to the plantations and other facilities seeking labor as the freedmen were trying to withdraw and work for themselves. This provided the states with a new, I'll finish here, with a new source of revenue during years when they were financially strapped right after the Civil War. So I'm just, this is rooted in history, and
Hmm.
these laws are still there. And Louisiana, they are comfortable using these black men as slave labor.
Mm.
In fact, many of those folks will still fly the Confederate flag because they're upset still that they lost the Civil War.
Well, yeah, because the movement to end it, right, or regulate the use of prison labor existed since the time when former Confederate states sought ways to maintain the use of slavery after the Civil War. So,
Right.
um, as you were pointing out, there was these racist laws referred to as black codes, right, to
Hmm.
criminalize uh, and imprison, criminalize and imprison and re-enslave black people.
Right.
So, and for the most, like you said, the most benign behavior.
Mm. Right. Right. Right.
But you see the mindset though, Dr. Childs. The mindset, sometimes we look at some black folks and we say they still have that slave mentality, but then you
Mm.
have, this a system that has that slavery mentality, the American justice system to be exact.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's what critical race theory. One of the things that's why I use critical race theory as a lens. When you take capitalism, it's rooted in a lot of aspects of capitalism in the U.S. is rooted in white supremacy and legacy of slavery. And so, um, and I talked about the private prison industry, industry individuals that are millionaires multi-billionaires based on the fact that they employ prisoners. I gave the example earlier. If I had access to a very large labor force and I did not have to pay them, or in many cases they may make pennies a day, like 50 cents a day,
Mm-hmm.
to produce everything, Stacy, from lingerie to not just license plates. That's the old stereotype, man. They make license plates, but lingerie to makeup to you name it, all kinds of things, shoes, clothes. There are companies that produce their product based primarily on farming it out to these private prisons, and the private prison owners get a kickback.
Right.
And furthermore, and this is what, if you watch if the viewers will watch 13th, the documentary 13th, it kind of unfolds this. It shows how they're cahoots with the politicians and the laws. The private prison organizations are in their bedfellows
Mm-hmm.
with some of the legislators, and so everybody's kind of getting a kickback. And the common denominator is black men, primarily black men.
Yep.
There's the statistic that says there are more black men in prison today than the slave population of the 1860s.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy stat there. We and you talking about private prisons, and of course the prison labor is a multi-billion-dollar
Yeah,
practice.
right,
And these private prisons, look, we've done stories at the Black Press where a phone call can cost a prisoner $25 for
right,
2 minutes.
right.
We've done those stories.
Yes,
And so it's private prisons. And I know that former President Barack Obama had for a time, well, during his not for a time, but during his administration, he um, put an end to or signed a bill putting an end to private practice. I mean, private prisons.
yeah,
However, his number 45, Mr. Trump, uh, he did an executive order to remove that. And so private prisons are thriving. We also know there's been many situations. Look, there was the situation there in Northeast Pennsylvania, not Central Pennsylvania, Wilkes-Barre, where the judges were convicted of sending these kids. It was called
right,
Kids for Cash. They
yes,
were sending them to these private prisons, and they were getting the kickbacks, as you mentioned. This was only a few years ago.
right,
So you
yes.
have corruption through and through.
And there are people, and and you're connecting it back to the idea of slavery on the ballot. There are people that will go out of business. This is not an exaggeration. There are people, and this is why 45 immediately overturned it, because he stood to lose money, him and his buddies,
Yep.
and all of the individuals that he is aligned with, all of the corrupt multimillionaires out there, multi-billionaires, they stand to lose a lot of money. Baseball caps. All right, I wanted to just add some. I'm trying to get people an understanding. Baseball caps are produced through private prisons, park benches, as I said, lingerie, braille books for braille for the blind, braille books, IKEA products, you name it, canoes, blue jeans are
Yeah,
produced by
and
prison.
and that what underscores that it's not easy work, right? And
Right.
these prisoners, that it's not like they're getting paid for it,
Mhm.
a few pennies a week for it. Mike V, though, Dr. Childs brings up the fact that in California, when they have those wildfires, they use prison labor to help fight those wildfires. Um, I'm not sure how you know. Well, I'll let you quantify that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I often say to my students, the people, the individuals that are at the bottom of the totem pole, that's the least valued in society, a person of color, particularly Black people. If you watch a film, I always like to use the example. If you watch a movie, a horror film, generally, and it's a running joke, the first person that's going to die is the black person. It's because in our mindset in society, black people don't have values as much value as say like the white woman protagonist in the film. And so, who are you going to send out to fight the fires and put themselves in harm's way? Black folks, because there's this narrative that African American people are criminals, that we're not smart, we don't contribute to society. So let's just put them in prison. They're thugs, you know. And
Well, and remember too, prisoners who refuse to work, they'll be denied privileges like phone
right,
calls or visits with their family
hmm.
and face solitary confinement.
Yes, like if you have a felony, I mean, I grew up in the inner city, and a lot of my relatives and friends have been disenfranchised and denied their citizenship because they have had prison. They have gone to prison. They have, and then many times the felonies were based on trumped up charges. They had to plead out. Like so sometimes, and we've heard this before, and it's true. Officers will plant drugs on these young men and say, "Is this your drugs?" And then they'll go to trial about it, trial for it, and then their public pretender will tell them, "Hey, you can either take the plead out for 5 years, or if you go to trial, you're going to do 10 years." And the young 18-year-old man is saying, "I didn't even do it," and they're like, "Well, either take the 5 years or plead out." You're having that, I mean, or go to trial and do 15. You had that all over the country. Many of
Yeah.
my friends that I grew up with are under those conditions, and so they're in the prison system. They're blackmailed. It's the new Jim Crow, uh,
Hmm.
that's what the author. I'm trying to think of her name, but anyway, she talks about that in her text. The new Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. Michelle Alexander, and
Well,
she
and watch.
opposed that.
Yeah, and watch the Supreme Court. They've already so we already seeing the presumption of innocence being removed, right? The you have a right to remain silent. The Miranda rights. They early this year they ruled that's no longer in play.
Right.
You don't have to have Miranda rights read, and you talked about those things, and you talked about the public. You said public pretender, but the public. So public defenders uh they're overworked.
Right.
They have such a caseload
Yeah.
where and they don't have the resources that the prosecutors have, which is unfortunate because
Right.
again, the criminal and people call it the criminal injustice system.
Yes, that's right. And when I say public pretenders, I mean the individuals that represented us in the inner city.
Hmm.
They were in cahoots with the judges, and you know, much respect for those that are out there as attorneys. People like Brian Stevenson. I mean, come on, you know, he's doing the Lord's work. That's what that guy is, you know, amazing. But just this system of the anti-blackness, a sentiment. This is what we talk about a lot in scholarship, where in the university where we've been using this term anti-blackness. We live in a society that does not want to be around black people, our ideas, and then when we're doing well, they're resentful of our ideas, and they have
Hmm.
these stereotypes about what it is we're doing. Young people, they're discriminated against, and they're in prison for things they did not do. And so a lot of the laws, going back to Louisiana, when I saw that didn't pass, it just was like, where do we live? What's going on? But it's based on this idea that black folks are criminals, they're thugs.
Yeah.
That it's based on the idea of white supremacy. I heard the teacher in the classroom, Stacy, teaching his students that he felt like it was a history class, and like
Mhm.
a high school class. He felt like that his race was more superior. He was teaching
Yeah.
this to students. As the footage is going around.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, I did see it.
you see that, yeah, and that I think that's indicative of the mindset of people that
Yeah.
we're an inferior race and that we should just be imprisoned, and that we probably would have been better off if enslavement was still legal.
Yeah, and keep in mind, as I mentioned about the Miranda rights being out the window, and the presumption of innocence being out the window. Now, also quietly, the Supreme Court made a decision last week too that uh, says that you're not entitled to a 12-member jury,
Mm,
and that was really on the books from the 1970s, actually, it's been reaffirmed. A lot of people didn't realize that you could actually go to trial with as little as 3 jurors.
Mm, mm, mm.
And to
Yeah.
be honest with you, I just learned that. So,
Wow.
um,
Imagine, yeah.
there's a young man on death row. He was convicted, and they only had 8 available jurors. And his argument to the Supreme Court last week was that he didn't have 12 jurors, and which made the trial unfair. And Supreme Court rejected that claim, saying that the Constitution does not provide you that option of having 12 jurors.
Wow. And what's going on is our rights are being systematically taken from us and dismantled. That's why it was so important to vote. And I'm so glad that we didn't have the so-called red wave that a lot of the crazies were looking to happen. Like you had that woman with the shotgun walking around with the guns. I'm so glad. I pray. I thank the Lord on high when I found out that she wasn't reelected.
Well, no, you talking about Lauren Boebert.
Yeah.
That race is actually still going on. They're still counting those votes.
Well, see, I should have known. Here we
Yeah,
go.
they're still counting those
Oh my
votes.
gosh.
But I keep telling it was funny when I saw this. When she posted that, the red wave is coming the day
Yeah.
before the election or the day of the election, and then social media is undefeated. They, after finding out that she is struggling to win,
Yeah.
she may even lose. Somebody posted back, responded to her and said, "Well, I think that was probably just bloating and cramping." And so,
Oh my God, Lord.
but you're right. She is this gun-toting,
Yeah.
she unapologetic. You know,
Mhm.
she is one of those who, she pledges her allegiance to Trump.
Yeah.
She is one of those who really work to go against teaching history, as David
Right.
Youngblood said, American
Yeah.
history, which, when we say Black history, we kind of, limit it, but American history, because Black people who have lived that history,
Yeah.
right? So she's against that. You mentioned earlier the Holocaust. I mean, she has come out publicly against the teachings of those things in public schools.
Yes, yes, that's so great. I wanted to add that Black history is American history. So when she talks about, I'm on a lot of times I'm on the front line of these debates. A lot of times when I'm even at my own institution, when I'm teaching about African American history or Native American history, I get pushback, and I have to slow down and tell the students, wait a minute. America, are you saying that the only valid American history is white American history? That's intellectually dishonest. Because African American history is American history. Women's history is American history. Native American history is American history. So when I'm teaching, if I do a unit on African American history, if I do an entire year on African American history, I'm taking some time to talk about a particular type of American history. If we continue to just push George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and so forth, white males as the real history, as the only valid history, then it's a whitewashed history. And as I said, it's intellectually dishonest. We have to go back and reclaim history.
Well, and Ron DeSantis is saying that America, the land was not stolen from the Indians or Native Americans. So you have stuff like that going on. And then Dr. Childs, of course, tomorrow is that red letter day, if you will.
Yeah.
It's the or orange letter day, as some people say.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, Donald Trump is expected to announce his candidacy for president 2024. But this is something we're going to talk about tomorrow, because they are eating their own, as it were.
Right.
There is a major civil war going on in the Republican Party between with Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. The Murdoch companies, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, and others they have their team DeSantis after all these years of being Team Trump.
And I was gonna say, I see Miss Greer's point. DeSantis is saying that the land was not stolen from Indians. I want to say this as a public historian, as a professional historian. When you One of the strategies of a totalitarian government or a dictator is to change the historical narrative and to keep people from learning their history. Mao Zedong did it. Other dictators did it. Even in enslavement, they weren't allowed us to read or write because they were trying to get us to not understand and know our history and know the facts. And so it's not an accident that they're going after the legislature. That the legislature is going after the classroom, saying that you shouldn't teach history, because if we don't know the history, then we can change the narrative and say things like the land was not stolen from Native Americans. That they're changing the history. They're saying only a few people, a lot of African Americans were happy in the South when they were enslaved. So they're trying to take possession of the narrative.
Yeah, Herschel Walker said, what was it? Herschel Walker who said no, it was the other noted philosopher, Kanye West, who
Kanye
said
West.
slavery was a choice. Bobby Henry writes in that if you believe Ron DeSantis, if you want to, but you're going to wind up back on the plantation if you believe Ron DeSantis.
Yes.
Some things are, as again, Dave Chappelle put it Saturday night live on Saturday Night Live, as he was talking about Herschel Walker. He said he's observantly stupid. So
yeah.
we he was at listen, Dave Chappelle, I know it's a slippery slope because
Right.
the New York Times came out immediately with a column calling his performance anti-Semitic, which it was anything but.
Right.
There was others railing against him. This was as brilliant a performance. I saw Eddie Murphy live. I've seen tapes, of course, of Richard Pryor in the past.
Yes.
But this was as brilliant as you can. He said something that was interesting, and people should pay attention. He said, when he talked about these things before, he said, my audience, they just laughed, but they wasn't listening. You have to listen to what that man says, whether you agree with him or disagree with him. He's trying to make a point. And I tell you what, that Saturday Night Live performance, whether, again, you are for or against Dave Chappelle, it is, you got to see it. And it's like, you want to criticize something, watch it. See it first.
Yes, right.
See it first, and then this man made some points that it makes you laugh, but makes you think. Many comedians only make you laugh.
Yes.
Chappelle makes you think, whether you agree with him or not.
Right.
So, I hate to be give a plug to, for NBC anything, but I would say that Saturday Night Live performance was incredible. Ferguson is not Hollywood, David Youngblood, that was part of it. Part, you have to see that part. And his whole he says in a brilliant way what we think, right?
Right.
Because he mentioned how he tried to talk to Kanye. He used to try and talk to Kanye, or he did up until a certain point. He said this time, he said, I think I'll just watch. So
right.
And he said Kanye got in so much trouble. Kyrie got in trouble.
That's right. Yeah, anti-Semitic.
It's again, Saturday Night Live. I mean, you can just go to Google or not Google, YouTube.
Yeah,
the whole monologue I think is on there now. Check it out, and perhaps we'll talk about that in another show. But Dr. Childs, Slavery on the Ballot. We appreciate you coming to break it down for us as always. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again too. We need the prophetic voices like Dave Chappelle in this season, in this hour, because we need Black intellectuals. I heard the quote that one of the things that they're afraid of is Black folks with that think. And also with a gun too. But
kind word will get you a certain amount of whatever, but a kind word and a gun will get you everything, right? Thanks for joining. Let it be known, everybody. We will see you tomorrow.
Thanks.